Hello and welcome to our devotion time. Today I will be reading out of the book, The Way Back to Mayberry. Today's title is, What, Me Worry? And we are talking about the episode, The Lucky Letter. Today's scripture comes from John chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Okay, I have to admit it. Under this calm and collected demeanor, I am a high-stress individual, or should I say a high-stressed individual. It doesn't take much to peg my internal anxiety meter. The longer I live, however, the more I realize that the things I worry about are the very things I have no control over. Furthermore, a lot of things I spend my time fretting about never happen. It seems that some people naturally expect the best out of life, but the converse of that statement is also true. Some people do expect the worst, and if I am not careful, I can fall into that category. Why do we worry and allow ourselves to get all stressed out? Is it our environment, a lack of faith, or are we just born that way? Furthermore, do we bring some of our troubles on ourselves? Barney was in a particular situation I can relate to. He allowed himself to get all worked up over something silly. At the time, however, the situation wasn't silly to Barney. The episode, The Lucky Letter, opens with Barney receiving a chain letter in the mail. Even though he discounts the effects a chain letter could have on his life, Barney immediately begins to type the 2 copies of the letter so as not to break the chain. Andy gives Barney a hard time about being superstitious, but Barney insists that he is just being cautious. Andy persists, and finally a frustrated Barney drops the whole idea. He ends up throwing away his copy of the letter. Then the trouble begins. Just like the letter warned, bad things start happening to Barney. He cuts himself shaving, he bumps his head, and a truck runs over his foot. Barney begins to think he is cursed. To make matters worse, Barney is supposed to participate in pistol qualifying, which is a yearly test required of all sheriff's deputies. With his streak of bad luck, he begins to wonder if he will even keep his job. Andy tries to calm Barney by telling him that all of this is just a coincidence. Andy also reminds Barney of the dangers of thinking about all the bad things that can happen until they eventually do. Andy suggests that Barney try to forget about his troubles for a while. He tells Barney to call Thelma Lou and have a nice, quiet evening at home. Barney agrees and takes Andy's advice. However, when he calls Thelma Lou, he finds that she is busy. It seems that Thelma Lou has plans to spend the evening gluing covers back on hymnals at the church building with Edgar Coleman. Barney automatically assumes that something is amiss and gives Thelma Lou the ultimatum. It's either Barney Fife or Edgar Coleman, and that's about the situation as he sees it. Thelma Lou promptly hangs up on Barney. In a span of just a few hours, Barney has lost his girl, his job is in jeopardy, and he is afraid to go outside because of what might happen to him. A fine state to be in for the pistol qualifying, Andy suggests that Barney brought a little of this trouble on himself. But Barney isn't listening. He believes that he is finished, that it is all over. He is defeated. It's fun to laugh at the antics of our beloved deputy, but I wonder if I am that different from him. I may not get all worked up over a chain letter, but plenty of things in my life can get me just as rattled. This episode causes me to reflect on how I handle the stress of everyday life. Of course, I know that struggles and challenges will happen, and I will have to deal with them, but am I guilty of needlessly bringing worry and stress on myself? In other words, am I the cause of my own stress because I'm worrying about something just for the sake of worrying? I am reminded of the first time I traveled to Germany on business. I was traveling with 3 co-workers to do some software demonstrations for an American military customer. Fortunately, the front end of the trip was not overly taxing, and we got to do quite a bit of sightseeing. My boss, who was a retired Army colonel, showed us a great time in Munich, Rothenburg, and other picturesque cities of that beautiful country. After a few days of play, we settled in for the business at hand. We were demonstrating some state-of-the-art simulation capabilities to several high-profile military officials. Basically, we had a series of computers set up in a briefing room. Mike, a co-worker, and I were the computer experts, and the other 2 traveling companions, including my boss, were the marketers. During one presentation, we had several high-ranking officers in attendance, and it was important for us to perform well. When we gave a presentation, the marketing guys would give a 30 to 45-minute briefing. Then Mike and I would do the actual computer demonstration. The room was fairly large and full of officers interested in our technology. John and Brian were flipping view graphs and providing background information for the demonstration. Mike and I were at the computer consoles waiting for our part of the presentation. The room was full, and it was getting quite warm. During the briefing, I began to feel some tightness and pain in my chest. I didn't really worry about it at first. I just attributed it to nervousness and the fact that it was very warm in the room. But the longer the briefing went on, the more uncomfortable I began to feel. Finally, it was time for us to give the computer demonstration. Mike and I performed flawlessly, but the pain was getting much worse. I was concentrating more on not passing out than on the demonstration itself. After what seemed like an eternity, the demonstration was over. The room emptied, and we went out into the lobby. It was cooler there, and I began to feel better, but I was still concerned. Since we were on an American military base, I thought there might be a nurse's station I could visit to see if anything could be done. I casually asked one of the resident military guys if there was such a station, and he said there was, but at this hour it was probably already closed. He asked if there was anything he could do, and that's where I made my mistake. I quietly told the guy I was having some chest pains and was hoping the nurse could look me over. The guy immediately thought I was dying. He screamed, "My goodness, man, we've got to get you to a hospital. You might be having a heart attack." Now, it might be helpful to know that at that time in my life, I was somewhat of a hypochondriac. The mere mention of an illness could cause me to have symptoms. At that point, I was indeed convinced I was a 28-year-old male having a heart attack on foreign soil. My next thought was what I had to do to get to a hospital, because I probably didn't have much time. I immediately found Brian and asked him if he could take me to the hospital. He looked at me like I was an idiot until I explained the symptoms and the fact that the military guy thought I was having a heart attack. Brian agreed that I should probably get checked, but neither of us had the faintest idea of where to find a hospital in the middle of Germany. As rumor of my serious condition spread, we found out from one of the locals that there was an American military hospital just down the road. Brian and I got directions and left. While in the car, I gave the written directions to Brian in case I became unconscious during the trip. We got on the road and it became very quiet. All I could think about was that I was probably going to die and they would have to ship my body back home like a fallen war hero. Poor Brian tried to cheer me up by telling me some story about a family member who had heart trouble, but to be honest, I don't remember anything he said. I just knew I was a goner. We finally got to the hospital, and they hurriedly put me in an observation room. The attendants removed my shirt and my shoes and quickly placed monitors all over my chest. It must have been a slow night because there were at least a half dozen nurses there poking and prodding and taking different readings. A couple of doctors came in and asked me a few questions. Basically, they looked at me kind of quizzically, then left the room. The nurses began to finish what they were doing, and they began to leave as well. Eventually, I was alone in the room with a lot of beeping equipment around me. I could see the monitor above me, and it sounded like my heart was still beating at a fairly regular rate. I was feeling some better about my survival chances, but my chest still really hurt. After several more minutes, one of the doctors came back in the room. He took one look at the monitor and said that from all indications, I appeared to be one of his more healthy heart patients. I could tell by his expression that I was probably going to live. He sat down and asked me several questions, trying to pinpoint where the pain was coming from. After asking about my current physical status, he began to ask other questions, such as why I was here and what I had been doing when the pain started. Even though I was not aware of it, I was under quite a bit of stress from the travel and the pressure to perform. The doctor and I talked a while longer, and then he released me to go back to the hotel. Later that night, I realized how I let a little situation explode into a life-threatening crisis, in my mind anyway. I began to think of ways to handle not only the big stresses of life, but also the everyday stresses that can build up over time. I slowly realized that after I was told that nothing was wrong, the pain in my chest had slowly disappeared. When I got back to the States, I went ahead and had a full physical just to be sure. All the results came back fine, and I was given a clean bill of health. However, this event stuck in my mind. Until it happened, I never really believed that emotional stress could cause physical symptoms. But I realize now that it can happen very easily if I allow it to. Sometimes I get so caught up in my profession and in the other activities of my life that I don't realize the stress I bring on myself. In this case, it took a sharp pain in the chest to make me realize that I wasn't handling things very well, even though I was not initially aware of any problems. When you stop and think about it, most of the things we get so worked up over don't really matter that much, but we needlessly bring the stress on ourselves anyway. Through my experience, I learned an important lesson on stress management, but I also learned how to avoid letting things get to me in the first place. Now, when I feel myself getting all worked up, I try to stop and take a little time to get myself together. Usually, I reflect on the situation and try to put it in its proper perspective. I have begun to realize that whatever I worry about is really not all that bad. In fact, it's usually something I can handle quite easily. It just takes a little while to remember what's really important. So, what happened with Barney's pistol qualifying? Unbeknownst to Barney, Andy had arranged for Thelma Lou to meet them at the firing range. When Barney realized that Thelma Lou still had faith in him, that is all it took. Her uplifting meant more to him than any chain letter, and his nervousness and stress immediately left him. Barney passed the qualification with a perfect score. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.